Very good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Nikhil Vaswani, and I'm a junior consultant at Turner & Townsend. And today we're kindly joined by Bernie Lazowski, senior consultant at Turner & Townsend. This is a retrofit information support and expertise event, which is fully funded by the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, and is delivered by Turner & Townsend. This will be a relatively short presentation, followed by plenty of chances to engage in a Q&A session with Bernie. The event will be an hour long, and we will finish on time. May I please request that you keep your microphones muted and cameras switched off during the presentation. The slide deck shared on screen will be made available after the event in a follow-up email to all attendees. Similarly, there will be a clean recording of this and all other masterclasses in the resources section of our RISE website, links to which I will share in the chat function shortly. May I please request that any questions be posted in the Microsoft Teams chat function as we go along, or alternatively, should you prefer, there will be an opportunity to ask questions directly to Benny after the presentation. And finally, there will be a quick word poll and word cloud at the end of the session. May I please request that you complete these, as it helps us understand the level of knowledge across our topics. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone once again for joining, and I will hand over to Bernie for today's presentation on writing a successful Warm Homes Local Grant EOI form. Thank you, and over to you, Bernie.
Hi there, everyone. Good to see you all here, and we'll just take you through essentially the key bits here today on the EOI form and trying to understand it a bit better and just sort of highlight some of the key parts of each section. So for some of you, if you want, it might be worth getting the form up as well to help sort of following along. But yeah, let's see how we get on, and then we'll work through any questions at the end. So bit of an agenda for today, so we'll just look over Warmer Homes Local Grant Expression of Interest form. That's kind of the main part of today, or the model, or how it works. So starting with the EOI and then moving into the DAC, introduction of the form itself, and then any key questions. So just quickly on Warmer Homes, so obviously Warmer Homes Local Grant makes up the bigger sort of picture of the two programs alongside each other, and they're all focused at upgrading up to 5 million homes, sort of working towards EPCC targets and net zero targets by 2050, targeting obviously fuel poverty, sort of low income households and social homes. And sort of some of the key performance outcomes is to get those properties that are currently below C up to C, with energy efficiency upgrades and low carbon heating as well. So looking at the expression of interest model and how exactly it works. So the EOI allocation model that's been set out in the local grant policy will use this expression of interest form essentially as the first step. So through this model, all eligible local authorities who submit an EOI form by the deadline of the 1st of December will be allocated funding. So essentially there's no pass or fail. It's as long as you meet the criteria and are eligible and you would like to receive funding, you'll sort of be considered for it. So as it says there, you need to meet sort of the minimum criteria for successful delivery via the delivery assurance check, which is then the next step before funding can be spent. So the EOI is the first step, and the delivery assurance check is a second sort of gateway before you can then start spending that grant money. And then just in the bottom there, relevant in that, please note sort of for West Midlands Combined Authority and Greater Manchester Combined Authority, they will, as sort of devolved regions, receive funding through a Trailblazer devolution deals, therefore are not eligible to receive funding via this EOI allocation model. So that's those authorities have a sort of separate program through those combined authorities essentially. So moving on to the form. So yeah, it's available. You can get it on the .gov website. So if you look up Warmer Homes Local Grant, you can find it next to sort of the guidance. That's where you can find the EOI form. And it's the same form both for individual and consortium applications. Please note, sort of not all of the questions are relevant for all applicants. So we'll outline that a bit more section by section when we get to the sort of covering what information you need for each part of the form. There's a link here, and we'll share the slides after today, where will take you to that local grant website, but you can also find it by just Googling Warmer Homes Local Grant. And then there's also some other guidance on there as well as sort of list of eligible postcodes for the indices of multiple deprivation income decile 1 to 2, which are those auto eligible postcodes for the local grant program. So this is just looking at the format of the form itself. So it's just giving a bit of an introduction on the types of questions, I guess, or the types of inputs. So we have sort of regular questions. So these are standard format within the EOI form, where a lot of questions will be written in sort of a free text box or a multiple choice yes, no, that kind of thing. So there's sort of more confirmations or sort of verbal responses. Then there's also tables that where data will be inputted. Could be names, but could be sort of numbers as well. And then there's some declarations as well. That are sort of statements related to sort of eligibility, I guess, within the EOI form that will need to be completed. So that's kind of the main three formats which kind of questions or information requests come in within the form. And then to give a bit of sort of background on the form itself, within each section of the form, there's sort of a bit of a brief summary at the top or an overview explaining the section and the kinds of questions that are in there. And also at the top, it will explain if any questions within that tab or that section only need to be answered by, let's say, consortium applications or regular sort of non-consortium applications. And then just to give a bit of insight onto the color coding as well. So here, each question has sort of a few different boxes. So there's in the light blue, you have sort of a guidance box for each question. And then in the darker blue, there'll be the actual question, so the direct question, and any sort of additional information on how the response needs to be entered, whether it's sort of free text or whatever other format it takes. And then finally, there's sort of the white section where to enter the response to the questions within the application form, or sorry, the EOI form. So moving on to the sections of the form. Now we've got sections 1 and 2. So section 1 of the EOI form is sort of the key information for the applicant or the local authority sort of filling in or leading on the application. And as it says there, so A to C and E to H in section 1 are mandatory fields for all EOIs, and then 1D is only mandatory for consortiums. But as you work your way through, it will be clear, sort of, it will be explained on each tab which sections are for which type of applicants. And then the second section, which is sort of the second tab along, consists of all the declarations which should be completed to affirm that the proposed project is will abide by the rules and requirements of the scheme. And again, there's a bit just to clarify here. So 2A to F are mandatory for all EOIs, and then question 2G is optional. Yeah, so then it also has a bit of an explanation there on 2G. So it should be completed where you are not able to affirm all declarations listed. In this case, provide an explanation as to which specific declarations cannot be affirmed and why. So it allows a bit of an explanation box on those previous sections. So those are all sort of really focusing on that background information for the application, to move on to the next sections. So then section 3 is really sort of that key information on the delivery assurance check. So it's starting to put in some dates, that kind of thing, of when sort of documents or how they're progressing, and procurement progress as well, which so I believe, let me just get the form up. Sorry, where am I? Here we go. I know. But essentially it's where you start putting in some dates. So just exactly. So when you'll transfer the documents, when you're transferring the contracts, that kind of thing, to give the idea of the sort of timelines of the project. So you'll need to provide those timelines essentially within there to give an idea of when the DAC will progress. And then question 3A is sort of a mandatory question for consortium as well. And then 3B to G are mandatory for all applicants. And a key bit here is as well, sort of question 3 is especially important. So a free text box, and you should provide details of your procurement methodology with the expected timelines, with specific focus on how these timelines allow you to meet your selected DAC month. So that's a key bit, because procurement sort of in Hug 2 has definitely been a challenge for a lot of projects, sort of keeping that on track and within the original proposed timelines to then not sort of affect delivery, because there's a lot to get done in that first year, isn't there, with all the mobilization, procurement. So that's just to try and sort of give confidence that those plans are in place and how you're sort of going to meet that DAC timeline. So, and then just wanted to add one more thing actually, just on section 3. At the top, there's essentially a section. This is for any consortiums that might need to complete the DAC. If there are consortiums where not all members are sort of ready at the same time, as part of the first question on that page as well, you can specify if the DAC will have a sort of waves of the DAC, so you can do multiple waves. If maybe sort of most of the consortium is ready by this date and a couple of members need a bit more time, you can do waves, and that's specified in section 3, and then further detail is given in Annex A, which is specific for consortiums. So just wanted to flag that as well while we're on this tab of the EOI form. So now going on to section 4. So section 4 is all about resourcing. So it essentially focuses on how the project will be adequately resourced, and there's also a requirement to have at least 2 full-time equivalent staff committed to the project by the DAC stage. So yeah, essentially you have to work your way sort of through this page on the resourcing. So just to flag sort of or highlight a few questions. So question 4A to B are mandatory. 4C is optional but must be completed if it's relevant or if it's required. Question 4C should be answered when the project will not meet the 2 FTE staff requirement by DAC stage, or if this will not be in place for mobilization. Apologies. And then in 4C as well, you should sort of explain how you procure on time, and how you'll provide the documents for the DAC, which is kind of that key gateway to then progressing with the project. Okay, so section 5, this is where it then starts detailing sort of the project scope, let's say. So this is where some of you sort of may have heard of this already. This is where it's the section or the EOI asks you to sort of outline the number of homes delivered in your best 6 months of past delivery, of essentially retrofitting homes under sort of LAD or HUG schemes. And then for consortium, you can kind of select mixed data or use mixed starting months of what best represents your consortium's performance over past programs, sort of understanding that the consortium may not have delivered together previously. So it could be that, there's a couple LAs who've done their own hug projects or LAD, and you're combining, and you're allowed to use each member's kind of best performance to put that together in that kind of instance. I mean, if it's a consortium that have delivered as a consortium before, that would be much easier. You kind of just take the best 6 months of performance for your consortium on, let's say, Hug 2, for example, to put together your proposal. And it just outlines here, sort of really important. This is kind of will outline the sort of scope of project you're applying for, and essentially the grant allocation will be based on this 6-month performance. And then it says your data should be from one single program. So if there is some overlap on previous programs, the only exception of that is the Sustainable Warmth Fund, which obviously was the combination of 2 programs under one. And as part of that, you'll need to outline which program your best performance is coming from, so the 6-month period that you're choosing from, or the data set. And you need to provide the starting month of the 6 months period, and the number of homes completed in that period. Starting from next month, RISE will be able to assist you with assessing your best 6 months of past delivery. And if you're looking for some support with that, please contact RISE at turnerandtownsend.co.uk, as it states at the bottom there. So a bit more on section 5. It also sort of looks at the requested capital funding you need. So there's sort of a first box where, as we discussed in the previous slide, where you put in your best performance, the month, how many you delivered in that, and then it'll calculate for you what that kind of represents as a homes per month basis. And then in the next box, it asks you to enter kind of what capital you're requesting or looking to deliver, I guess, under this program. And that's sort of on an annual basis, apologies, not as a whole program, on an annual basis. And then this is where you request the financial or the finance for 25-26 and each subsequent financial year. So it's sort of rolling basis. And then there's a table with calculated fields, and it kicks out sort of a suggestion of how many homes that could be. And sort of it also splits out A and A to give you a bit of more of an understanding of sort of how that would look. And it's really strongly advised that you consider the past performance, as we've discussed in that 6-month period, in the estimate, but also sort of your mobilization, let's say. So how much time do you need for the DAC, and mobilization time, procurement, those kinds of things. Take that into consideration as well, alongside that strongest 6 months of performance in previous programs, because there will be a period at the start of the project where you're getting all set up and everything in place for delivery. It just outlines there sort of question 5C is optional and should only be completed where you think you can deliver more homes per month than set out in the table 5A. This requires justification and is provided a max of 250 words. And then Annex A is that sort of final section of sort of the core application data. And this is sort of for consortiums only. So the example we had earlier, which was if the delivery assurance check is being done sort of in waves because different consortium members are ready at different time, that sort of needs to be shown in Annex A. So Annex A, exactly. It says there, this is for consortium members who need to undergo their DAC in waves over multiple months. These questions mainly focus on outlining how many DAC months you will need and the transfer of details from previous funding schemes. So then question 6A to D and F and H are mandatory for consortia undertaking DAC in multiple waves, with 6E being optional. Bit more detail there just on question 6F is the most involved, with a free text reply of 500 words maximum. This is where you're required to outline your procurement methodology and timelines for each DAC month group, and if this approach will be taken for each group of LAs taking their DAC in the same month. So it's sort of key field to sort of outline that and sort of allow assessors or the department to understand your approach and what you're planning as part of that. So that was it. So to summarize, hopefully that allowed you to understand a bit more, give you an overview of kind of how the form is formatted and those key sections. So to summarize, section 1 is essentially sort of your details. Section 2 is sort of declarations, just to ensure sort of eligible for all this funding. Then section 3 is those key DAC information. So looking at timelines and how, when you propose to do your DAC and when the information will be available. Resourcing is in section 4, so the staff available and meeting that 2 full-time equivalent requirement. And then section 5 is where you can outline sort of the funding and based on the top 6 months of performance from previous waves. And then finally, Annex A, as we said, is for any consortiums needing to take a waved approach to the DAC process, if not able to do them all at once. Yeah, and so essentially, hopefully you understand the process a bit more, what's required in the form, types of questions in the form as well, and how they're formatted, and just where to find what you need. So, for example, at the top, you have the summary of each page, and then each question has a bit of background as well, and a better understanding of what you need to do depending on your project. So if you're a consortium or a regular applicant, and that final section as well. So you can find further webinar or this recording on the link here as well, where you get the slides and other sessions as well. And upcoming sessions is a Rise Drop-In Warmer Homes local grant session in a couple of days at 3 p.m. And then, you can submit as well as self-assessment, which is sort of the first step to getting support from Rise for your local grant expression of interest. Thank you very much. And I'll have a look at the chat now.
Thank you very much, Bernie. Really appreciate your time and expertise on this topic and for presenting on the same.